Hi, Rob McIver here. In this video, we're going to make the time sequencing of temporal adverbial participles easier for second year or intermediate students of New Testament Greek. In another video on adverbial participles, we discovered that temporal adverbial participles were by far the most frequently found in the New Testament, and they can be translated with after, during, while, when, etc. We didn't have time in that video to stop and ask ourselves when should we translate with the word after and when with the word during and when some other word. By the end of this video, you should understand which is the most appropriate English term to use. And along the way, we're going to look at a case study. Matthew 26 to 27 will allow us to see how the tenses of participles provide subtle indication of the movement of the action being described. I'm now going to share with you the key to understanding the time sequencing of the participle when compared to the time sequencing of the main verb. And here it is. The time implied in the tense of an adverbial participle is in relation to the time implied by the tense of the main verb. Did you like that? Well, maybe it doesn't explain everything straight away, but let me illustrate. Now you can see that I've indicated here the flow of time and the place that the narrator has. So the narrator looking upwards is looking at time present from their perspective. If it's to the left of the narrator, it's prior to them, and if it's to the right, it's after their perspective. Now let's look at the simplest example. You will see that I've indicated the tense of the participle and the tense of the main verb. And if the tense of the main verb is present, then the action is contemporary with that of the narrator. If the participle is also in the present tense, it is at the same time as the action of the main verb. So if the main verb is in the future tense, then the action of the main verb is future from the perspective of the narrator. And if the participle is in the present tense, it is at the same time as the main verb. So the action of the participle is also in the future. If the main verb is in the aorist tense, then almost always the action implied in that verb is in the past. The participle is in the present tense, so the action implied in the participle is contemporaneous with the action of the main verb, in other words, past from the perspective of the narrator. That's reasonably straightforward. Let's show you a much more complex example. What happens if the main verb is in the future tense and the participle is in the aorist tense? That the participle is in the aorist tense shows that the action implied in the participle is prior to the action of the main verb. Now, if the action of the main verb refers to something in the far distant future, then the action of the participle could be just prior to that. In other words, future from the perspective of the narrator. Another possibility is the action of the main verb is future, but the aorist tense of the participle has brought the action back as far as the contemporary time of the narrator, or even earlier. So you can see there are three options. The aorist participle can refer to action in the future and in the past. Yes. Well, isn't it fortunate that that particular combination of tenses is only rarely found in the New Testament? Here we have a much more typical example and one that is easier to understand. So we have the main verb in the present tense and the participle is in the aorist tense. So the action of the main verb is taking place contemporaneous with the narrator, but the action of the participle takes place before that. So it's in these kind of circumstances that we would translate the aorist participle as after something happened. Another commonly found example, the main verb is in the aorist tense, so usually refers to action past from the perspective of the narrator, and the participle is in the aorist tense also, so the action of the participle took place before the action of the main verb, further back in the past if you like. And again, we often translate this arrangement as after. Now, I was in two minds whether to include this table because it might be a bit confusing. I have the tense of the participle, the tense of the main verb. So if the tense of the participle is present and the tense of the main verb is aorist, the action implied in the participle is in the past. If the tense of the main verb is in the present, the action of the participle is in the present. If the tense of the participle is in the future, the action of the participle is in the future. So far, so good. If the tense of the participle is in the aorist tense and the tense of the main verb is in the aorist, then the action of the participle takes place before the action of the main verb, and they are both in the past tense. If the main verb is in the present tense and the participle is in the aorist tense, then the action of the participle takes place before the action of the main verb. That is taking place in the present. The action of the participle takes place in the past. And the future is the tricky example. So as I say, if you find that helpful, well and good. If not, well, every time you review this video, just skip this section. Now that we've thought about how the temporal sequencing between the participle and the main verb is determined by the tense of the participle and the tense of the main verb, let's go back to some of the examples we used in the earlier video on adverbial participles. And we can look at them and see why, in some cases, it was appropriate to translate the participle with the word after, and in other cases, it was appropriate to translate the participle with the word during. The first example I have here is from Matthew chapter 12. Hoda pharisio idontes ipen to. The main verb ipen is in the aorist tense, so the action is taking place in the past. The participle is in the aorist tense, so that the action of the participle takes place earlier than the action of the main verb. And in this case, it is appropriate to translate it, and after the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, Torta ipon Jesus ex aelthen sun tois mathetais or tu. The main verb is ex aelthen. Again, it's in the aorist tense. The participle is also in the aorist tense, ipon. The action took place in the past. The action of the participle took place even earlier. And again, you'll see that the word after is the most appropriate translation of this temporal adverbial participle. Jesus idon tein metera legai te matri. Here we have a different idiom in Greek than in English. It sounds very abrupt to say Jesus saw the mother, he said to the mother, but it means his mother, of course. So, getting back to the point that we're looking at, which is the tense of the verb and the indicative, the main verb, and the tense of the participle. The tense of legai is in the present tense, and the tense of idon is in the aorist tense. So the action takes place in the present from the perspective of the narrator, but the action of the participle took place in the past prior to the action of the main verb. So again, after is the most appropriate translation of that temporal adverbial participle. Kai klines tein kephale paradoken ton pneuma. Paradoken is in the indicative mood. It is the main verb. It's an aorist tense, so the action is taking place in the past. Klinas is likewise in the aorist tense, so the action implied by klinas is taking place before the action of the main verb. And once again, after is the best translation of that temporal adverbial participle. After he bowed his head, he gave up the spirit. Now, here are some examples that were used to illustrate temporal adverbial participles that were translated with the English word during or while. Ex erchomenoi de huron anthropon. The main verb huron in the aorist tense. The participle in this case, though, is in the present tense. So the action of the participle takes place at the same time as the action of the main verb. And it's appropriate to translate it as they were going out, they found a man. Torta ipen en synagoge didoskon en Capernaum. The main verb is ipen, aorist tense. The participle didaskon is in the present tense. So the best translation is, He said these things while teaching in the synagogue at Capernaum. The present tense of the participle implies the action takes place at the same time as the action of the main verb. Endeimuntes entosomati ekdeimumen apo tu kuriou. Ekdeimumen is in the indicative mood. It is the present tense, as is the participle. Endeimuntes, interesting enough. And again, the most appropriate translation is while, as in, while I am at home in the body, I am absent from the Lord. The present participle here and in the other examples shows that the action implied in the participle is taking place at the same time as the action of the main verb. And in all of these examples, while or during is by far the best way to translate these temporal adverbial participles. Now let's apply this theory to the well-known text found in Matthew 26, verses 26 and 27. I'll read the first sentence to you in the Greek. Es the onton de orton, lebon ho Jesus arton kai eulogaises, ekleisen kai dus tois methetais ipen, labeti fageti, torta estin to soma mu. And the editors of the Greek New Testament have placed a full stop there, indicating the end of a sentence. Now, the main verbs are usually in the indicative mood, and I have shown them in red here. So let's look at the sentence in terms of its main verbs. The main verb is ekleisen, he broke, and ipen, he said. Who broke? Nominative, ho Jesus, Jesus broke. What did he break? Arton, bread. Jesus broke bread. And he said. That's the basic sentence. What participles do are they add texture and meaning to this basic sentence. So we have es the on tone, which is in the present tense, and shows that while they were eating, this is something that happened at the same time as the action of the main verb. So Jesus broke the bread while they were eating. You'll notice too that this sentence starts with the genitive absolute. We have a participle in the genitive and the ortone is in the genitive. The next participle is labone. It's in the aorist tense. Jesus labone, taking bread, and eulogaises, blessing it. So this is in the aorist tense. This happened before the action of the main verb. And Deus tois methetes ipen. Again, deus shows that something took place before the action of the main verb. So before Jesus said something, he gave the broken bread to the disciples. And he said, labeti fageti, take, eat. This is my body. Now that we've looked at the grammar and the time sequencing, we can understand why the new RSV translate this sentence as it does. While they were eating, Jesus took a loaf of bread, and after blessing it, he broke it, gave it to the disciples, and said, take, eat, this is my body. Let's look at the second sentence. Kai labon poterion kai eucharistases edoken ortois legon pieti ex ortu pantis. There is one main verb, the verb that's in the indicative mood, edoken, he gave. The participle labon is in the aorist tense, so the action took place before the action of the main verb. So this is something that took place before edoken, before he gave. And eucharistases likewise is in the aorist tense, and so the action of that verb took place before Jesus gave. And after taking the cup and blessing it, we've got to add it to make English sense, he gave it to them, legon. Now, legon is a participle in the present tense. So this is something Jesus did while he gave it to them. So as he was giving it to them, he said, pieti ek ortu pantis. Drink of it, all of you. Now, as you can see, knowing about adverbial participles helped us to make sense of this verse and the time sequencing implied in the verse. So, when do we use after And when do we use during? Here we used after with a aorist tense participle referring to action that took place before the action of the main verb. And we also translated with the word during with participles that were in the present tense, implying the action of the participle was taking place at the same time as the action of the main verb. Our principle that the time implied in the tense of an adverbial participle is in relationship to the time implied by the tense of the main verb helps us understand when to translate such participles as after, or during, or while, etc. This video has been one of a series of videos on participles. You can find the others most conveniently by clicking on the subscribe button below. And hey, if you've found this video useful or interesting in any way, why don't you click on the like button below? Thank you.